Introducing 1994 Audi RS2 Avant, the world's first truly high-performance luxury estate car.
The Audi RS2 is a very important car. Not because it's collectible or fun to interact with as an enthusiast, or because it helped pioneer an entire genre of cool car, all of which it did, but because of what it means to Audi. After lying dormant for decades, the Audi name was resurrected under the aegis of the Volkswagen Group in 1965 and produced a whole lot of kind of dull cars. By the 1980s, though, this was changing in a big way, and Audis were starting to compete with lower-level BMWs and Mercedes. To complete the transition to a genuine top-tier German manufacturer, Audi needed a performance brand to sell cars to the public. Fortunately, they had spent a good portion of the 1980s cleaning the world's clock in a variety of motorsport environments, and working together with Porsche, they had just what they needed to complete the reinvention of the Audi brand and create the first-ever Audi RS car, the RS2. As early as 1971, Audi used the now iconic marketing phrase Vorsprung durch Technik, which means something like leading through technology. Given Audi's fairly conventional cars at the time, the statement was a bit empty, but there was a man in the room who would use that phrase as his North Star to completely redefine the Audi brand. That man was Ferdinand Piëch, and his demanding management style and obsession with engineering would see Audi become a global powerhouse under his leadership. He joined Audi in 1972, was in charge of engineering by 1975, and became CEO in 1988. His goal was to make Audi's cars genuinely covetable by synthesizing luxury and motorsports, which he did through a raft of technical innovations which came to define Audi. These included 5-cylinder engines, turbocharging, and 4-wheel drive, all of which converged in Audi's most iconic models of the 80s and 90s, including the Quattro and, of course, the RS2. The first of these innovations was the 5-cylinder engine. Its purpose was to move the second generation of Audi's largest car, the 100, upmarket. Previously front-wheel drive and 4 cylinders only, the 100 clearly needed more power. The project team didn't have the budget to make significant technical changes to the car's layout, which meant retaining a longitudinally mounted engine and front-wheel drive. An inline-6 would have been too long to mount in this way, so they added one more cylinder to the existing 4-cylinder.
It has a 5-cylinder engine.
Adding a newfangled device called a turbocharger to Audi's new 5-cylinder a few years later brought the horsepower to 170, which helped identify an issue that led to Audi's next major technological advance. In the winter of 1976-77, while performing cold weather testing on Audi's passenger car line, engineers noted that the 75 horsepower all-wheel drive Volkswagen Iltis support vehicle consistently outperformed the much more powerful front-wheel drive Audis on slippery surfaces. The engineers quickly realized that the punch of the turbocharged 5-cylinder coupled with the traction of 4-wheel drive would blow everyone else into the weeds. They approached Piëch, who immediately gave his support, going so far as protecting the development team from the board of directors so they could work in peace. The eventual system, called Quattro, debuted in production form in an all-new car at the Geneva Motor Show in March of 1980. The system was installed in a new two-door flagship, simply called the Quattro Coupe, powered by a 200 horsepower version of the turbo inline-5, and thus the defining ingredients of Audi's most exciting cars for the next 15 years converged for the first time in the same car. As it turns out, that was far from the car's most exciting characteristic. The Quattro was developed to go rallying, making it the first 4-wheel drive car to do so and transforming the sport forever in the process.
And away goes one.
The Quattro was an absolute force in the right conditions, eventually winning 2 world championships and 23 rallies outright, driven by icons like Stig Blomqvist, Hannu Mikkola, Walter Röhrl, and of course Michel Mouton, who also drove the car to outright victory at Pikes Peak in 1985. Meanwhile, in the United States, Audi had a PR problem brought about by the unintended acceleration fiasco and sought to clean up their public image by going racing. Rallying held little interest to Americans, so Audi began by chasing and breaking the world speed record for an all-wheel drive car using a specially modified 5000 CS driven by Bobby Unser at Talladega Superspeedway in 1986. The 650 horsepower 5-cylinder car set a new record of 206.825 miles per hour. And 2 years later, Audi took things to a whole new level for 1988 by entering one of the most American forms of racing that exists, Trans Am. During this period, Trans Am was dominated by large displacement rear-wheel drive cars like Camaros, Mustangs, Corvettes, and Nissan Zs. So when Audi showed up with their 200, a large sedan powered by a 2.2-liter engine, they were laughed off the stage. Hans Stuck and Hurley Haywood had never raced an all-wheel drive car before, but their third teammate, Walter Röhrl, had more than a little bit of experience doing this. By mid-season, the Audis had been so dominant that regulators handicapped them with smaller tires, more weight, and an intake restrictor to reduce power. But because of the traction of the Quattro system, the car still prevailed, winning the manufacturer's championship and also ensuring that four-wheel drive was banned for subsequent years. So they moved up a level for 1989, entering IMSA's GTO class, where the new Audi 90s again excelled. Back in Europe, Audi decided to enter DTM with their new large S-Class sized flagship, the V8 Quattro, and shockingly, won 2 consecutive championships in 1990 and 91, beating icons like the BMW E30 M3 and Mercedes 190e Cosworth in the process. Aside from its motorsport significance, the new for 1989 V8 Quattro meant that Audi had for the first time a 3-model sedan line to match those from BMW and Mercedes. 2 years later, in 1991, Audi introduced its first performance variants ever of its standard cars, the S2 and S4, based on its small and medium-sized sedans. They weren't quite as potent as offerings from BMW Motorsport, and that's the gap that this car, the RS2, sought to fill. Its development was, unsurprisingly, initiated by Ferdinand Piëch. Despite having left Audi to become CEO of Volkswagen in 1993, he continued to perform all model approval drives for the RS2, always with Porsche lead project engineer for the car, Michael Hulscher, on board to directly receive feedback. Why was a Porsche engineer on board, you ask? Well, this car's transformation from S2 to RS2 was performed largely by Porsche. Audi didn't have an in-house performance car branch, and they weren't sure how the market would react to the car. So rather than tie up their own resources, they farmed the work out. Initially, a tuning and racing firm called Conrad Schmidt Motorsport built a prototype and delivered it to Audi, who beat on it for a while before eventually turning what was left of it over to Porsche so they could continue to work on it. It was a tall order for Porsche. The schedule to develop the car was just 9 months, and there was additional time pressure because the Audi 80, on which the RS2 was based, was due to be replaced by the all-new A4 only a year after the RS2's production started. Virtually from the beginning, there was agreement that the car would be a station wagon. This put as much daylight as possible between the RS2 and other Porsches, particularly the Carrera 4. Styling revisions were handled by Porsche, who initially proposed a concept based on the mid-size S4, although the smaller S2 was ultimately chosen. While the Mercedes 500e was similar in that it was both engineered and built by Porsche, the RS2 had a much more explicit Porsche aesthetic touch. Various Porsche components appeared on the outside of the car, including turn signals, fog lamps, side mirrors, and wheels. The rear license plate was moved down to the bumper from the tailgate in order to make room for a full-width rear reflector to evoke this iconic Porsche design cue. Subtle Porsche script appeared on the front and rear badges together with not-so-subtle Porsche lettering on the red brake calipers. Those red brake calipers were among the Porsche mechanical components on the RS2. They were sourced from the 968 Club Sport, while a higher capacity fuel pump came from a 911. The cars were constructed at Porsche's Rosselbau factory in Zuffenhausen, where the 959 and Mercedes 500e had previously been built. Audi supplied standard wagon body shells already painted, which Porsche did not alter aside from fitting a stronger front crossmember. All RS2 specific components were fitted here, including most of the driveline, which employed a reinforced first gear, strengthened axles, and a heavily reworked engine, as demonstrated by the increase in power from 220 horsepower in the S2 to 315 horsepower without any change in displacement. This was achieved with a larger turbocharger, intercooler, and injectors, and a more aggressive camshaft, together with reworked cylinder head, intake manifold, and complete exhaust system. The bearings in the bottom end were strengthened as well. Ultimately, a shade under 2,900 RS2s were made, At 99,000 Deutschmarks, the car was costly, although it offered similar straight-line performance to a Porsche 993, which cost 27,000 Deutschmarks more, and in that light, the RS2 looked like a bit of a bargain. Compared to other fast wagons, however, the RS2 is expensive, but it was faster than all of them. The traction provided by the Quattro system allowed some sensational achievements, perhaps the best known of which was a 0 to 30 mile-an-hour time of 1.5 seconds, which Autocar magazine excitedly noted was faster than not only the McLaren F1 they tested, but every other car too, including Jacques Villeneuve's F1 car. 0 to 60 miles an hour arrived in 4.8 seconds, faster than both the Ferrari 456 and the 512 TR. Driving the RS2 today, it still feels fast. Certain of its characteristics feel very contemporary, but the power delivery most certainly is not one of them. Making 315 horsepower from 2.2 liters means that there is pronounced turbo lag. In the RS2, this characteristic is immensely charming today and is offset by the relatively close ratios in the 6-speed gearbox, which has fairly short throws and is very pleasant to use. This combination means that enormous explosive thrust and fantastic 5-cylinder turbo noises are never more than a quick gear change away. Tooling around in the RS2 is pleasant and civilized, requiring no specific technique or finesse. Its controls and manners don't feel particularly Porsche-like, aside from the brakes, which are, in a word, fantastic, with a high, firm pedal and apparently inexhaustible ability. Otherwise, perhaps its most Porsche-y characteristic is the performance it delivers, both in a straight line and around bends. Like a 911, the RS2 has a layout that shouldn't work dynamically, but in quintessentially German fashion, good engineering masks the inherent shortcomings, and it is genuinely good to drive. The RS2's longitudinally mounted engine sits entirely ahead of the front axle, yet somehow in the RS2 it's largely irrelevant. The character of the powertrain, the massive grip, and the superlative brakes make it a fun car to drive on a technical road. It is surprisingly softly sprung, which keeps the wheels in contact with the pavement at all times and gives incredible traction. While the body control isn't taught by modern standards, the car never runs out of suspension travel, and it is strangely nimble at speed because you never feel like you have to back off the pace, even on the most tortuous road. You can drive it right to the limit and it just doesn't care. And because it's all-wheel drive, it can do a whole host of maneuvers that simply aren't options in other cars. Floor at mid-corner? No problem. Roads wet and covered in leaves? Still an absurdly fast car point to point. Does it understeer? Sure. In a steady state at the limit, the front wheels do let go first. But brake late and keep trail braking in to keep the front tires biting and lighten the rear end, and the car is happy to play. The car is so capable and confidence-inspiring that it's easy to ask more and more of it, and before you know it, you're traveling indecently quickly, forgetting that you're driving a station wagon until you hear the screaming from the passengers, pets, and potted plants coming from the back. These characteristics of the RS2 perfectly encapsulate its personality. It doesn't seem like it should be terribly fun to drive, yet somehow through the brute force of good engineering and the supernatural competence that enables, together with an extremely characterful powertrain, the RS2 is hugely entertaining.
What a tremendous car. Holy moly.
The powertrain is a central part of the RS2's appeal, and it makes the car simultaneously the end of one era and the beginning of another. It is the last and best of the old-school Audis because of its longitudinal 5-cylinder all-wheel drive powertrain, a layout that was synonymous with the Audi name during what was arguably its golden age. Yet as the first RS car, it is also the beginning of the modern era of Audi, a time when the company is a fully-fledged premium marque with its own performance division. Interacting with the RS2 leaves me with a feeling that reminds me, curiously, of the Mercedes 500e, even though they go about their business so differently. That feeling is a desire to use it for everything. A spicy Italian car, for example, leaves me wanting to go on vacation afterwards, to not interact with it again for weeks. This is the opposite. Both the RS2 and 500e are incredibly secure and well-engineered, as well as performance-oriented but understated, which gives them an appeal that is inward-looking. It is a car that you drive for you, and not for the people around you. And for that reason, its appeal isn't transitory, it is enduring. And that's before you get to the RS2's incredibly cool origin story, utility, or rarity. The net result of this is a car with exceptional texture and depth, the kind of staying power that makes you want to drive it every day, forever.
This over the LFA every day. 100%.